I even made that video. I worked this week on it, and I didn't get emotional once. And parenting isn't easy, is it? Goodness gracious. I figured you guys would need Kleenexes, not me here. I'm okay. So, this morning we're going to be looking at what's called a phase in a kid's life, because our kids go through different phases, and ultimately, so many times I feel like as parents we're in this. Let's just get through this phase. Let's just get through this time frame, and then they'll stop doing this. They'll stop acting like that. Maybe they'll take a shower. You know, we go through these phases, and it's so much of let's just get through it. And I wonder, what if as parents and as people we stopped saying let's just get through the phase, and we started saying let's not miss this phase, because ultimately once the phase is gone, it's gone. Carter, for the first time ever yesterday, crawled for the first time and started crawling towards. Oh, geez. I can't believe this. Julie loves this, for the record. But what if we changed our mindset of let's just get through it to changing it to let's not miss this phase. Let's take advantage of this phase. And ultimately, a lot of this comes from some of us here at church went to a one-day conference called the Orange Tour, and all the conference was based off this book called It's Just a Phase, So Don't Miss It. And so all the information you guys get today, a lot of it will be found in this book. So if you would like to know where you can get this book, please come find me. This is written to church leaders on how to take advantage of these phases, but ultimately there's a lot of great stuff for parents. And so we went to this conference, and Jeff and I were talking. It was one of those things where we could not just sit on this and do nothing with it. There was something we felt like we had to present to you guys and share some things with you guys, because there's something we could all get out of this. And some of you guys are like, well, I'm not a parent, so I don't need to listen. I'll just see how the game's going this morning, since there's a game in London this morning. I'll just check the scores, see how it's going. But ultimately, we all influence the next generations, or at least we should be, because some of you guys aren't parents anymore. You may not have kids in the house, but you've got grandkids or you've got nieces and nephews that you guys interact with. Or maybe you guys volunteer here at the church, which is awesome. You guys are my favorite. But ultimately, we all should be involved in this. And we believe as a church that every single person sitting in this room, every single person that calls Cadiz home, should be involved in our children's and youth ministries here at the church. And some of you guys are like, wait a second, I don't do babies, I don't do teens, whatever. There's plenty of people that can serve the nursery or lead a small group, but there's other ways you could serve by helping someone pay to go to camp or to be a driver. We've had people who've just helping us when we've filled up both vans for an event. Whatever it is, we feel like all of us as a church have a responsibility to raise the next generation. And so when we look at a phase is simply this. A phase is a time frame in a kid's life where you can leverage distinctive opportunities to influence their future. That basically means this, that in each time frame in a kid's life, there are certain things about that phase of their life that we need to take advantage of to make sure that we influence them in the godly way God desires from us. And so that's, as we talk about, the word phase will be said a lot this morning. So when we say phase, that is what this means. And so there's four primary phases that we're going to be looking at this morning. And the first one is the preschool phase. And this is the phase when nobody sleeps, everyone smells, no one's on time, and one little mesmerizing little human being fills up our social media page and every other part of our life. Ultimately, this is where I'm at right now. It is crazy. If you follow my social media page, it's basically Carter's social media page at this point. So the next phase is the elementary phase. This is the phase where unfiltered words make you laugh, homework makes everyone cry, games become competitive, and your conflicting, enthusiastic kid proclaims, "I've got this." I'm sure some of you guys at home have heard that. I've got this, right? Next phase we're going to look at is middle school. This is the phase where there's never enough groceries and too many hormones. Nothing you do as parents is cool anymore. The junior hires smell again. And ultimately, they keep reminding you that, yeah, I know, right? You guys have been in that phase. And ultimately, the high school phase. This is the phase where friendships shift, grades count, there's more stress, and finally your emerging adult starts to do things for the first time and for the last time, and ultimately both of you start asking, what's next? These are the four different phases we're going to look at this morning and what we need to do. And regardless as parents, what phase you're in right now, ultimately the most important phase your kid could ever be in is the phase that they're currently in. That is the most important part of where your kids are, is where they currently are. And we need to make sure we take advantage of the time we have currently with where the age groups lie for your kids. And so each phase is obviously different. There are many different things about a preschool as there is a high schooler. But ultimately, we need to remember as parents, you also can't parent the same way through each phase. That there are different phases, just like the definition of phase. There are different things we must take advantage of through each period. And so we're going to look at that. And so for the next 10 to 15 minutes, we're going to look at three different ways that as parents we tend to miss phases. There are three typical things that we do to miss things about our kids' life. And so we're going to talk about those three things and what we can do to help take advantage of those times. So here we go. Three ways we miss a phase and what we can do to help. The first thing is this. We don't see what we don't see. And here's what I mean by that. There are ultimately things in our life that we don't see that are going on. And that your kids aren't going to come up and tell you, and sometimes they don't even know how to voice. At the conference they said each kid has an invisible piece of paper with an invisible question on it that they don't know how to think about, they don't know how to act out, and they don't know how to even ask. Your kids aren't going to come up to you and say, I've got this problem, what am I going to do? Right? They're not going to do that. Because ultimately every kid at every phase is going through some type of crisis, and they're trying to ask a question. And here we go. So let's look at some of those crises and questions the kids ask. So for preschool, the crisis is ultimately birth and growing in a brand new environment. Birth is a traumatic thing from going in the womb to in this new world and being raised by your parents. And everything is new from the first time you walk, the first time you crawl, to the first time you do anything. Everything is new and brand new, and you have these people you've never seen before. It's new. It's a crisis. And ultimately the question they're asking is, am I safe? They want to know, am I safe in this new environment? Am I loved? Am I protected? Am I safe? And we as parents need to make sure to embrace their physical needs so that we can establish a physical trust for them. We need to embrace them in everything that they're doing. That's why I think embrace is the key word for this phase, because ultimately as parents, what do we want to do every time they cry? We want to pick them up and love them and kiss them. When they get boo-boos, we kiss a boo-boo, right? Or I love the joke, it doesn't matter how big or how strong you are, when a preschooler hands you a pretend phone, you always answer it, right? We want to embrace every single thing that they're going through. We need to embrace it because they're asking, am I safe? Is this an important, is that? So elementary age, let's look. The crisis is the comparisons. This is the stage where comparisons begin, where there's grades now, and some people do better than I do, and some people made the math bowl team, and I didn't, or some people is the starter on the flag football team, and I'm not. It's this comparison game where you're always being compared to someone else. And ultimately, the question they ask is, do I have what it takes? Do I have what it takes? And so as parents, we need to engage their interests so that we can earn relational credit. We need to engage them in what they're doing because ultimately everything they're doing is new for the first time too, and they don't know whether am I good at this or am I bad at this? Is this something I'm interested in? So we need to embrace everything that's going on in their life to help them know they do have what it takes. It may not be like everyone else in their class, but they have what it takes, and that's important. So for middle school, growth and puberty. Voices change, hair begins to grow, body parts grow, all this stuff, growth and puberty, voices crack, right? There's just new beginnings for their bodies and everything changes for them in growth and puberty. And ultimately the question they ask is, who do I like and who likes me? Because for a lot of kids, once they move to middle school, they're going to a new school altogether now, and they're not sure who their friends are, who's going to like them, and who do I like? Do I have a boyfriend? Do I like her? I don't know. And so ultimately, and sometimes this can go the same for parents. Do I like my parents? Do I not? Right? Some of you guys have been treated like you don't think your kids like you, right? But ultimately, these are the questions they ask through this time frame. And for high school, the crisis is freedom. Boundaries versus independence. I know a lot of you high schoolers have had parents, I've had conversations with you about kids think they should be allowed to go do this when they shouldn't, and that they're after school now with sports and clubs, and so there's this crisis of where are the boundaries? They're driving now, and it's crazy. And so ultimately the question is, why should I believe, and specifically, why should I believe you? They're wondering as they begin to own their own faith, why should I believe God? And why should I believe you and what you tell me about God? Why should I believe my teachers? Why should I believe? And it's just a question of why should I do this? And so ultimately is this. As parents and as people trying to influence others, we need to be aware of what is going on in the life of others. Because we try and parent like these kids aren't going through these crises and they're not asking these questions, ultimately we're going to miss an incredible opportunity we have to relate, to connect, and help our kids grow through each and every one of these phases. As it talks of being aware, there was a time when I was in college where my neighbor, good friend of mine, we were in each other's weddings, and there was a time where he and his girlfriend had gotten in a fight on the phone, and it was very traumatic. And so ultimately, if I go over there and say, hey, you want to play Halo? Let's go have a good time, he's just going to be like, no, go away, right? But ultimately, here's what I did. I went next door, and he grabbed his guitar and started playing and singing. Ultimately, the singing, he's a guy that's great at guitar, but the singing part is... So it was kind of hard for me to go over there. So I went over there, and all I literally did is sat on his bed and his couch, and I laid there for an hour as he just sat and played the guitar. I think I literally fell asleep at one point. But I went over there, and I sat, and I listened to him play guitar. And ultimately, he got up and gave me a hug and just said, thank you so much. I didn't say a word. I slept, right? But ultimately, I was aware of the things that were going on in his life, and I knew he didn't want to have some theological conversation. He didn't want to talk about school. He didn't want to play Halo. He just needed someone to be there with him. And ultimately, when we're aware of other people's situations, these are the kind of things that happen when we can sometimes not say anything, but still be exactly what that person needed. So we need to be aware of everything going on, because ultimately, even as adults, we all go through crises, right? Am I going to keep my job? Am I going to get cut the next time there's job cuts? Am I going to make enough money to provide for my family? We all have crises and questions that we're asking as parents, and if we're not aware of other people's what's going on in their life, we're going to miss a huge opportunities to speak Jesus into them. So we need to be aware of everything that's going on with them. The second way we miss a phase is we don't anticipate what we don't anticipate. And here's what I mean. John 10:10 says, the thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy, but I have come that you may have life and have it to the full. Ultimately, here's what it means. It's basically the devil, the enemy, has a plan. Its plan is to steal, kill, and destroy. Here's what I mean, because the thief comes to steal potential of our kids. Our kids have an incredible potential to be whoever they want to be, and whoever God has called them to be, they have a potential to do incredible things. They will be ultimately the next generation of our church if they're not already. They have great potential, but the thief comes to steal that. The thief comes to kill identity. It comes to kill who they are as people and who they have defined themselves as. And the thief has come to kill that. And ultimately, the thief has come to destroy the image of God in them. That there's so many things that kids deal with that when the thief destroys the image of God, it destroys who they are as kids. And so ultimately, we need to be aware that the enemy has a plan. And so ultimately, we need to have a plan as people too. We can't just go in blindly and say, no, I hope this works out, and that's it. And so here's a couple things. I want to talk about a couple statistics, because when we talk about we don't anticipate what we don't anticipate, kids these days are going through a whole set of issues that you guys as parents never had to deal with, right? There's social media. Cell phones have changed the entire world in so many different ways. And so what I want to do real quick, some of the teams are going to come up and they're going to help me. And so I want to talk through some of the statistics that kids are going through nowadays. And here's the reason why I wanted them up here. Because I feel like so often when we hear a statistic, that's all it is, a statistic, right? That doesn't happen in my community, that doesn't happen in my church, and ultimately that doesn't happen in my family. But ultimately, the majority of the things that I'm going to talk about this morning, I have had discussions with kids in this church about. These statistics aren't things that just happens in the world and in your school, but these are the things that are happening amongst the kids here at church and the kids in your family. So don't view these just as statistics. View these as things that your kids and your kids' friends are going through. Okay? These aren't just numbers. These are actual things. So here we go. For the preschool age, 4 out of 10 babies are born in single-parent homes. And so that means coming home from the hospital, ultimately, 4 out of 10 kids are coming home to one parent. And that has drastically changed from when you guys were older, where it was dual parent, and that's just the way it is. Now, we cannot teach the same, we cannot relate the same as if every single kid has both parents at home. We just can't. So if we look at the next one, ultimately 1 out of 10 preschoolers, their family has no access to health care. Then that changes drastically. Even with Obamacare and all this stuff, people can't afford it. They don't have a job where they offer it. Whatever it is, 1 out of 10 kids have no access to health care. And ultimately, that changes the way those parents raise their kids, and ultimately, whether they take them to the doctor or whether they get their flu shot, or regardless of what it is, with 1 out of 10 kids not having access to health care, that changes the way those parent their kids. So finally, when we move on to elementary age, 4 out of 5 girls worry about their weight. And I feel like as a society, we feel like weight in women, that's an older problem, right? Once they get to high school and boys start liking them, or college, they start to think that worrying about their weight happens then, and ultimately it begins now. In elementary, 80% of girls worry about their weight. When we talk about, the enemy coming in and stealing the identity of our kids, this is what we mean. The enemy begins to tell these girls, you're a little overweight, you need to lose about 10 pounds. So girls get so wrapped up, and even boys, they get so wrapped up in how we look, and that is who I am compared to who I am, and that's ultimately they're made in the image of God. But that's what I'm talking about. These are the things that kids deal with. The next thing, by the end of elementary, 2 out of 10 kids are sexually abused. By the end of elementary, 20% of kids are sexually abused. And you talk about you cannot parent or relate the same way. This is what I'm talking about. Because ultimately, you cannot treat these kids the same as you can any other kids. And you don't know who these kids are. You don't know who's been sexually abused. And so we cannot blanket just kids that are raised in a normal house like we are, where we go to church every Sunday, and we've been raised right, or not. Because ultimately, these are the things that your friends and even your kids are dealing with. And so we can't treat every kid the same. We have to take advantage of these things. And ultimately, the third thing is 1 out of 5 elementary age students live in poverty. 1 out of 5 elementary age students live in poverty. That means they have food stamps. That means there's free and reduced lunches. That means a lot of nights these kids don't have enough to do at home because they don't have access to TV or whatever. So they're probably on the streets hanging out with their friends, spending as much time as they can at school and doing all this other stuff except for being at home. For middle schoolers, middle school is actually the peak of cyberbullying. And some of you guys are like, what in the world is cyberbullying? I've never heard of that. Basically, cyberbullying is bullying online. Because the world is a crazy place, and there's so many crazy things. Did you guys know there's actually a website and an app called Hot or Not? And you can actually put your picture on there, and people can vote whether you're hot or you're not. And that's all it is. You just tell people whether they're hot or not. And also, there's a new thing going around Instagram right now where people set up anonymous accounts and they pair two different people from their school, a boy and a girl, and they pair them up, and people vote whether they would make a good couple or not. And so all that turns into is, no, she's too fat for him, or no, he's not cool enough for her, or no, she doesn't have enough money in her family to be able to date him. And that's what it turns into. You talk about cyberbullying, this is a huge issue, and this is normal. Cyberbullying is a normal thing, but it's not a good thing, obviously. But obviously we can't treat our kids, we can't treat other people's kids like they're not being bullied online. Also for middle school, 1 out of 10 students are cutting. They're self-harming. 1 out of 10 kids are, because they don't know how to deal with pressures. They don't know how to deal with the issues that are going on in middle school and friends and puberty, and so they self-harm. And ultimately, by the end of middle school, 8 out of 10 students have viewed pornography. By the end of middle school, 80% of kids have viewed pornography. It's accessed right here. This has boomed the pornography market, is our cell phone, because now it's on our nightstand. We can pick it up and watch whatever we want right here. And so ultimately, we need to stop thinking that the only way to get pornography is to go to the local movie joint and go to that little secret back room where the pornography is, right? I always remember going as a kid, and there was always that secret room that I was never allowed to go in, right? We used to think that is how you get pornography. It's not anymore. It's right here. It's at our fingertips. And ultimately, we need to treat it like it is. So for high schoolers, 3 out of 5 students are sexually active by the time they graduate. 60% of kids, by the time they graduate high school, are having sex. Also, it's interesting, I found as the book talked in the research, that 10th graders actually have the highest rate of suicide of any age, any grade, anything. You are most likely, if you're going to commit suicide, you're most likely to do it as a sophomore in high school. I think that's crazy, because as a sophomore in high school, you have so much potential, you have so much life in front of you. God has so much in plan for these sophomores, but yet here they are ending their life because life is hard. They have no one to talk to. They don't have. It's very sad. And the final thing for high schoolers, 1 out of 4 students admit to drinking alcohol in the last 30 days. 25% of students admitted to drinking alcohol in the last 30 days. Thanks, guys. You guys can go sit down. So ultimately, this second one was, we don't anticipate what we don't anticipate. What I mean is, we don't anticipate these things happening to our kids. We don't anticipate these things happening to the kids in our church, in our schools, and in our families. But ultimately, this stuff is going on in this church. People are dealing with these things in this church. People are dealing with these things in your homes. You can't parent and you can't act like it doesn't happen. We have to anticipate your kids are going to deal with this stuff. You have to anticipate that kids are struggling with this. They're going to struggle with their weight. They're going to be invited to parties. They're going to this, that, and the other. We can't parent like it doesn't happen. We have to be aware. We have to anticipate this thing. So what's our response? Ultimately, our response is this, that we must fight battles together, both with our church and our family, and as a married couple. You have to fight these battles together. You cannot be successful alone. And ultimately, so as a church, here's what we're doing. Ultimately, we are trying to recruit the best possible people we can to champion the next generation. We are trying to get the best possible people to serve these kids, to talk to these kids, to relate to these kids. And that's why actually next week is so important for our church. Right after church next Sunday, we're having our education team meal, appreciation and recruitment meal. And basically what that is we eat free fazoli's. So, I mean, if anything else, just come for the free fazoli's and a potential Billy Joel sighting. Rumor has it. But no, we come, and this is a time for us just to appreciate the awesome, incredible volunteers that we have in our church, but ultimately, it's a place for all of us to figure out in what ways we can plug in with our kids and our youth. Because as I said earlier, every single person in this church has a responsibility to train the next generation. Even if that means serving in the nursery, or if that means like Sherry Shepard or Shirley New, who stood behind a computer and check all of our kids in for our security, or people like Maxine South, and Shirley Roberts, who make phone calls to our workers every single week. They're not necessarily on the front line serving the kids, but they are just as important as anyone who sits in one of these rooms or teaches one of these classes. And so we all have a responsibility to help with the next generation. Also, if you notice in your bulletin, right in the middle, every week we have something called Kids Alley. And that is basically a recap and some conversations you can have with your kids every week based on the conversations our leaders are having with your kids out in Sunday school and out in Kids Praise that are going on right now. So those are the kind of resources you as parents need to use to talk to your kids. Also, devotion time is extremely important and should be a valuable part of every single one of your homes. And ultimately, as parents, we need to realize that an absent parent is just as influential as a present parent. Let me say that again. An absent parent is just as influential as a present parent. And I don't just mean parents who aren't there from the start, one of those 4 out of 10 who are raised by single parents. I mean also the married couple who lives at home where one of them tends to work way more than they should, or they're involved in way too many activities and they're never home, and the only time the kids see them are when they're eating breakfast and when they're getting tucked into bed at night. As a parent, you say that if that is the only time you spend with your kids, because ultimately, kids spell trust, T-I-M-E. The more time you spend with your kids, the more time we spend with people in general, not just our kids, the more time we spend with people is the more they trust them. So we have to be present in the life of our kids. And I'm not just talking about doing devotions at night and going over the kids' alley or having spiritual conversations. You need to have fun with your kids. When was the last time you guys went out and just did something fun? That is extremely important to your kids and to raising them. They need to have fun with you. They need to spend time with you. They need to go play putt-putt or whatever it is. You guys need to spend time with your kids. And ultimately, part of the reason we want to spend time with is because we need to have conversations with kids. That's the other side of it. Because when kids can't talk out, they act out. And ultimately, this is what that means, that if kids don't have a safe place to talk about things, all they're going to do is go act it out somewhere else. You've got to talk to your kids. And so ultimately, as parents, you guys have a responsibility that your kids should not learn more about sex at school from their health teacher than they do at you at home. Which is sad. That's the majority of the way kids learn about sex is reading it online, talking to their friends, and learning from their health teacher. Ultimately, they need to be learning that from you because we need to be having those responsibilities. And when I say you, I mean me too. I need to be prepared to have that lovely conversation with Carter one day. But we need to have those conversations. We need to be willing to have tough conversations about marriage and sex, and regardless of what it is, we need to be honest and open with our kids. And the reason we need to be honest is because your imperfections make you human, and your humanity makes you influential. And basically, here's what that means. When we're honest with kids, we're going to tell them that we aren't perfect, because I know you guys aren't perfect, because I know I'm not perfect, right? And so when we explain to them we have imperfections, it makes you human. And once your kids realize you're just not this authority figure parent who's trying to destroy their life and make them be in bed by 9 o'clock, they realize that you are actually influential because you are human. And you've dealt with this stuff, you've struggled with this stuff, and this has been a big part of your life. And so we need your kids to know you're imperfect so they know you're human, so you become influential. So if we look at the third and final reason we miss a phase, it's we don't remember what we don't remember. And we have a lot of things that we're supposed to remember about our kids. We're supposed to remember who they like, who their favorite band is, what their favorite movie is, and ultimately those things change on a weekly basis, right? That stuff is changing so much. But there's one critical thing that as parents we must remember for everything. And ultimately I want you guys to know that above all else, if you guys get nothing out of this morning, whether you're a parent or not, ultimately this is the thing that we need to remember. And it's probably something that you guys have heard before. It's something it's scripturally, that it's really important, but don't miss it. I'm serious too. I cannot emphasize enough how important this is, because this will change everything about every relationship you ever have, and that's ultimately this. Every kid is made in the image of God. Because ultimately we're really good at remembering, my kid failed that test last week, and I'm so mad at him. He was 5 minutes late to curfew. He is so grounded. I cannot believe she is wearing that to church, right? Ultimately, we're good at remembering that, but we're not good at remembering this. We're really good at seeing the sins and imperfections of our children, but ultimately that's not the most important thing about them. Ultimately, this is the most important thing about every human being that has ever walked the earth, and that is that they are made in the image of God. And so we get that from Genesis 1:27. So God created man in his own image, and the image of God he created them, male and female, he created them. It is extremely important for us to treat our kids that way, because ultimately we can't expect our kids to follow Jesus until you treat them like they are made in his image. Let me say that again since I fumbled up. Don't expect kids to follow Jesus until you treat them like they are made in his image. And ultimately, I think this is the thing we fail to do in so many instances. You know, Jeff just got done talking with a great series called Life and Mission, where we talked about, last week he did the whole sharing your testimony, and I was this, and now as a Christian I am this, and how our life is changing, sharing our words with these people and what Jesus has done for our life. But ultimately, if we don't treat them like they are made in the image of God, our words don't matter. We have to be treating them like this. And so regardless of whether you're a parent, whether it's a coworker, even if it's your boss, we ultimately need to be treating them like they are made in the image of God. You know, we have an incredible potential as Christians and Christ followers to influence the next generation and every single person we meet in the name of Jesus. But ultimately, we must be doing that. We must be treating people like they are made in the image of God. And some of you guys are like, you know what, I don't even know if I believe in God, so how could I treat people like that? Ultimately, you need to hear something this morning. You may not believe in God, but you are made in the image of God. Bill Nye is made in the image of God. Any atheist, any person you could think of, no matter how bad they are made in the image of God. Any person you can think of how good they are, Martin Luther King, Billy Graham, they are made in the image of God. These kids are made in the image of God, and you are made in the image of God. And ultimately, that's the most important part about all of us. And so if you're here this morning, and if you've never really met Jesus before, if you've never really come into a relationship with him this morning, I invite you, we're going to sing a song soon, and I invite you just to come forward. And I would love to tell you about the God that changed my life. And ultimately about Jesus, who ultimately I'm created in his image. But ultimately, also when we sing this song, I realize that parenting is hard. And it's probably the hardest thing you're ever going to do. I remember when Carter was born, before he was even born, there were a few minor issues. And at one point, I just had to leave the room because I was just crying, and I didn't want Danielle to see me so upset. And as I sat out there crying, I was like, I am never doing this again. He wasn't even born. I was like, I'm done. I can't take this. Because ultimately, being a parent makes you more vulnerable than you will ever be in your entire life. But is the best thing and most important thing you could do with your life as well. And so this morning, if you just need prayer, if you know that you've messed up, if you know that you can't do it yourself, which ultimately none of us can, and you just need prayer this morning, I invite you to come. So I'm going to pray, and if you just need prayer, now that I'm a parent, I relate to you in so many ways, but then there's so many things that I never will understand. But ultimately, as a church, as a family, we have to do this together if we're going to raise the next generation the way God has called us to do. So if you would you stand and I'll pray together. God, I pray for us this morning. All of us, whether we're parents or not, God, I just help us all to know that we are made in your image, and that is the best thing about us. But God, also I pray specifically for these parents. Parenting isn't always wonderful. It's not always sunshine and rainbows. And God, I just pray for all of us and help us just to do what's best for you first and our kids. God, give us strength as we go through this journey of life, and help us ultimately to treat others and to treat ourselves like we are made in the image of God. Father, I pray for each of us. Help us just to have a relationship with you. And God, I pray if we don't, we begin to see you in us this morning, even if for the first time. Father, we love you. And it's in your name I pray. Amen.